And good morning. I'm here with Yvonna Gray, author of Dyslexia Toolkit, and I'll hold the book up for a moment. There'll be a link to this book in the blog. So this is a keeper, folks. Very, very practical for teachers and uh, for parents. So lots of good ideas and things to do in here. Okay, I'll start by saying I loved the then and now, first and then views at the start of your book, and I'll let Yvonna talk about that when she talks. I'll mention that we do have a lot of things, a lot of practices in common. Now, in recent Twitter conversations, people are saying, "Oh, you don't believe in common ground." Well, yes, I do. And some of the common ground that I seem to have with Yvonne includes using tracking, scanning, learning about sources of variance in spelling, learning about sources of variance in spelling, reading together, and most importantly, self-generated books. That's my meat and potatoes, folks, when I'm working with a kid, um, especially an older kid. Those kind of self-generated stories and books are really the way to go. All right, the format of her lessons in the book are simple. They're easy to follow. Parents and students, parents and teachers could use them, and they'd be useful to both. I've done way too much talking. It's time to turn things over to Yvonne now. And she's going to start by telling you about herself, and then she's going to dive into the book and her ideas around it and her rather extensive background. And please don't be afraid to brag about yourself a little. Her rather extensive background in this whole business of helping children with dyslexia. Okay, it's all yours.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Dr. Sam. I love to talk about teaching reading. It's my life's passion, but I got into it in a rather unusual way, I think. And that is, I started out in psychology. That was my original education, and had not planned to be a teacher. However, when my oldest daughter started first grade, we were rather shocked to be called into the school, and the teacher, the principal, the counselor, all explained to us that our daughter was uneducable. That's the word they used.
Oh dear.
Uneducable.
Oh dear.
And I wondered, do you know the same child I do? Because she's very curious. She remembers everything. She's always trying little experiments and learning new things. How could she be uneducable? Well, it turns out she couldn't write her name or read the letters of the alphabet. And so that translated for them into uneducable. And the school decided she needed to be bused to a very special classroom where she would learn, they said, over 12 years, how to wipe tables. And I thought, well, I hadn't planned on homeschooling, but I think in 12 years I could teach her to wipe tables, so I can do just as well as they can. So we took her out of school. And then I thought, well, we need to find out why the school thinks she's uneducable. So we had her tested, and she was dyslexic and a few other labels. ADD is one of them, and I'm sure you're familiar with that one.
Quite familiar with that one.
And so I said, well, that's not like something no one's ever seen before, but I'm not actually trained to deal with that as a homeschooling mom. So I ended up going back to university and getting a master's in special ed with an emphasis in neurodivergent children. So teaching reading to neurodivergent children, specifically dyslexic kids. That was a wonderful journey for me. And after those 2 years, I started using what I had learned with Alta, and she learned to read, not just a little bit, but she reads 3 times faster than I do. And that uneducable child now has a master's degree in computer science and a doctorate in music. And I'm not saying that just to brag about her, although it's easy to brag about her, but that her brain works very differently than the average brain. And so many of our kids in the classroom, that's true. And if we just write them off as uneducable because they're not learning the way we're teaching, that's a cop-out. Because as you know, there are just hundreds of ways to approach information. And if the child isn't learning it the way we're presenting it, then it's our job as teachers to present it another way. So after homeschooling my girls, I went into tutoring and had the wonderful, wonderful career of teaching hundreds of kids to read. Usually those kids came to me after trying something else that didn't work. So most of my students came to me after they had had intensive multisensory phonics or Orton Gillingham-based programs and had not learned to read. Now, those programs work for a lot of kids, but not for every kid. And so I met an awful lot of extremely desperate parents and teachers who had no idea what to do next. And I thought, surely something's out there that is a simple guide for parents and teachers who are too busy to read reams and reams of research, but I couldn't find it. So
Okay, and I'm going to interrupt you just for a moment here. I'm putting in a bookmark so that I know where it is. Okay, so folks listening to this tape, this is where she's going to start diving into some of the nuts and bolts of the wonderful lessons she's created. And I'm going to ask you one more time before you do that to talk to us briefly about that quote from the beginning of your book that just caught my eye. It was from your partner, I think, about overcoming dyslexia versus, well, you'll know it and say it better than I can.
Yeah, let's just read from it. When Alta, my daughter, and I, after she was grown up and she's a computer scientist and all of that, we decided we need to put what we had learned into a book in a simple format so that any parent could access it and use it without understanding all the educationese, without going to school to learn all about dyslexia. They could just use some simple techniques to help a kid right away. And so that's what the book is about. I love what Alta wrote in the foreword. She's my co-author, and she wrote, "I think the saddest word in the history of dyslexic education is despite. For many dyslexic people, despite seems to define them. Quote, if I work harder than anyone else, maybe I can get a college education despite being dyslexic. Or I passed algebra despite my dyslexia." These are expressions of great personal triumph and overcoming adversity, but they're also a way of saying I'm dyslexic first. Everything I do will be despite my dyslexia. I will never be as good as someone without dyslexia. Then she says, I am dyslexic, but my parents tried numerous techniques with tremendous patience and let me be who I actually was. I didn't grow up covered in despite, because replaced it and worked much better. Because phonics was useless to me, I speed read faster than my peers. Because as a dyslexic, left and right are the same to me, I flip shapes and equations in my mind and see patterns in math that others miss. Because I struggled horribly with arithmetic, but later loved higher math, I hold out hope for students I tutor. Because dysgraphia made writing torture, I learned to type. And she has other things that where she's turned the difficulties that dyslexia presented into challenges to overcome and even gifts that she then learned to use. So we put a lot of that into the book from her private perspective, because she understands from the inside out how a dyslexic mind works.
Okay,
I'm not
that
dyslexic.
gives me the perfect, I'm bookmarking. I warned you that I would. So that
Mhm,
gives me the perfect segue to say, hey, now we're going to talk about some of those nuts and bolts in the book, uh, and the wonderful lessons in the book. And thank you for your patience. And
mhm.
by the way, I think I mentioned if you ever want to find out about ADD, just look me up. My brain is totally wired differently than everybody else's, but because of that, I'm able to do things and connect dots that some others don't always see. So I guess I can use my because on my ADD as well. So
Yes.
thank you for that, and now it's all yours.
So what Alta and I decided we needed and that we wanted to put out into the world so it was available is a toolkit for parents and busy teachers. And that toolkit would allow them to try different things with kids. So, like Dr. Sam, I think phonics is important. Like Dr. Sam, I think comprehension is important. And I think all the tools to get there are important. And limiting children to one technique is just a very bad way to go. And so, what I wanted to do was open up the whole toolkit and allow parents and teachers to try a whole variety of things. So, in the book, we've collected 27, I believe it is, 27 of the most effective tools that we found working with dyslexic kids over a period of about 30 years. And so I'm revealing my age there, but uh,
Yeah.
but what
My age is unlisted, as they say in that commercial.
unlisted, yes. So as I retired and ended my career as a dyslexia tutor, I really wanted to pass on everything I had learned, but in such a way that it was simple, easy to access, and not a whole lot of verbiage, because so many parents of dyslexic students are dyslexic themselves, and they're not going to read a 20-page research paper on dyslexia. Or I happen to love reading white papers, so I've read hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of them, and that's okay. But what I wanted to do was to take all that research and pull out those nuggets that are actually practicable by a parent on the couch at home helping their kid, or a teacher in a classroom who's got 20 or 30 kids and needs something they can implement or easily give to an aide or volunteer, and have something the kid can actually get their teeth into and start using right away. So these are tools you want to give to children to allow them to read more easily if they're neurodivergent. I start in the book with a chapter on phonics. I left that out of the first edition, but in this second edition, which I just published, I had so many questions from readers about, hey, where was phonics? You don't believe in phonics? Well, of course I believe in phonics. I left it out of the first book because I assumed all reading teachers would already have that tool. So I put in a chapter on phonics to start the new edition and explain, here's how you present phonics in a variety of ways. And if the student doesn't learn to read using that tool, here are 26 more tools. Try each of them and see what lights up that kid's face. Because children love to learn, and when they find some way for them to gain knowledge and to learn how to read, they will latch onto it. So that's what the tools are about. And like Dr. Sam mentioned, one of my favorite tools is self-generated stories. That's one of the chapters. And each of these chapters, I should say, is between 1 and 3 pages long. I keep it real short. Each of the chapters starts exactly the same way. I define what the tool is in a sentence or two. I give the background. So what kind of research led me to this tool, or what's the scientific background to it, but not in a bunch of technical terms, just a very short paragraph about the background of that tool, and then an explanation of how to use it with a kid. So I keep it really simple, straightforward, not a lot of words. And that way, it's a handbook that a parent, an aide, a teacher, any interested adult can pick up and immediately use with a kid. That's the idea. Not all tools will be used with all kids, of course. Every child's different. And so the whole idea behind this book is that it is a kit, it's a tool kit, and you use the tools and figure out which ones work for that kid. And I think that ties in really well with Dr. Sam's work, and that's what drew me to his blog, is because I started reading him and going, yes, yes, oh yes, this is exactly where we need to go in education.
Well, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're very close to that point where we give you a chance to wrap things up in just a moment. And I will put an additional plug in for that self-generated story thing. I call it language experience. And you can find that online as well. That's oftentimes when I've got that, oh boy, this person's had a hard time of it. Where do I start? Those self-generated stories are a great way to start. I had a 16-year-old who was a non-reader, and I'll tell you what, we started generating thoughts and stories around the driver's manual. All of a sudden I had him and he just came right along, and he was very happy to read back the stuff that he'd written about the manual. So those self-generated stories are kind of like always my starting point on the really on the kids that seem to have a history of, oh, nobody's been able to help them yet. And I'm of course a firm believer in there's a way. All you have to do is be looking for it. And the beauty of it is you now have did I hear right, 27?
I believe it's 27 tools.
Okay, so we have 27 tools here. If one doesn't work, try the next.
Yeah, 27 tools.
Okay. So that all said, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Well, one of the tools that has gotten the most feedback since I published the book is tracking, and that's also called audio assisted reading. That's where you use an audio book or an adult reader to read out loud while the student follows along in the text. It seems so simple, and it's so often overlooked as an incredible tool for exposing children to rich literature at a level they're interested in, not dumbing it down, letting them read along, no pressure, and the results are spectacular. So in the book, I explain how to use audio assisted reading in a way that really just helps a student soar right away without any embarrassment, without any pressure.
Okay, and I'll piggyback on that and say my good friend Tim Rosinski and also Eric Litwin use music in the very same way.
Oh, yes, exactly.
If you're singing along with the song, it's like the old, I'm going to date myself, so I won't say it, but you know, where the lyrics are there, the karaoke lyrics are there below, and you're singing the song and watching those lyrics. That's a very fun way to do things too. So I think we are now to that point where we do the famous ending for Bomarito, and that is we do a Zoom wave goodbye. So if
all right,
hearty Zoom wave goodbye, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Sam.
Okay, bye-bye.